So tonight we're doing a WordPress editing with blocks. And I thought I've been doing quite a few of these more Gutenberg type requests for my little WP quickies things. So I thought I'd do a kind of bigger meetup, just kind of bring it all around together about this whole WordPress editing block environment and see what your guys' reactions are with that and just get a little bit of discussion going on as well. So if you don't know me, my name is Will Brown, and I'm one of the WordPress Sydney Meetup organisers. So welcome to the WordPress Sydney Meetup for August. As I say, tonight we're going to be looking at the WordPress editing with blocks. Some new block types coming. There's some different ways of doing things, and it seems to be changing quite a lot at the moment. If you're watching on live stream, hit the subscribe, thumbs up, like, all that sort of stuff. Give me some good juice. Give us some good juice. That'd be great. Quick agenda is that we usually start around about 6 and end right about 7 to 7:30, depending on how many questions and stuff are asked. Please abide by our code of conduct. So you can see the code of conduct there. You can visit it. It's at WPSyd.org and then /code-of-conduct. Too long didn't read. Basically, be nice. Don't be a jerk. Okay, and everyone will have a great time. So I want to give some thanks to our sponsors as well. So the sponsors, they obviously help us on the physical meetups. So they help us with pizzas and venues and all that sort of good stuff there for drinks and stuff. But, you know, during the online stuff, they're helping us with licenses. And so they're still there. They're still helping us out. So go and visit them. So we've got Kinetics, WP Engine, Plesk, WordPress community support, and Microsoft Reactor as well. And just a quick note that I'm looking to build up a team of organisers so that we can kind of keep delivering these meetups, the WordPress Sydney meetups. If you are interested, then there's a link for a Google form, and I'll paste it into chat later on and underneath the video and on the meetup page as well. So if you are interested in becoming an organiser to help out, there's only like 2 or 3 hours a month. There's not a lot to at the moment because we're still just all online. And so if you're interested, fill out that form and I'll get in touch with you. Let me just check and see if everyone is still here. Chat. Okay, and participants, waiting room, someone's there. Let me get these people in. Okay, so news for today, for August rather. I'll copy some of these links in the chat just so you can see. You can have a quick look at them. Set to everyone. Okay, there's some links. So in August, the big kind of news was WordPress 5.8 kind of brings block editing to the widget area. And there's a link there for that. Another big news was a little article winged its way around. That's the second link there. So it's the coywolf.news article. And it basically detailed how a plugin author who was creating a plugin who had a prefix of WP- in his plugin name, and that basically got rejected by the WordPress.org plugin team. And it kind of led to a whole big conversation of brand participation. So basically, WordPress, the WordPress Foundation, they own the WordPress TM trademark and the name WordPress. They also trademark the WP logo as well for that. But they do not trademark WP as a WordPress trademark. That is not trademarked. However, long story short, they've been told by Automatic or the WordPress Foundation to from now on, reject any plugins that begin with WP-. So if you're a plugin developer and you submit a new plugin with WP- whatever it is your plugin name, then there's an automatic script in there that flags up to the plugin team and you get rejected. So even though they don't own the copyright for that, and there's no real reason for them to start banning that, they are. And it's as of now forwards. So there's no real reason. They've just been told by the WordPress Foundation, they've been told by people, the bigwigs, that you're no longer allowed to submit a plugin with a WP- at the front of it. So that's a bit sad because there's a lot of people that use the WP slug, WP- something. So that's quite sad that has happened. The reason that they usually have, they've got a whole big function that reserves words. So things like Yoast is reserved, WordPress is reserved, Microsoft, all that sort of things, lots of brand names that are reserved. And that's quite right, because you don't want to be creating a plugin that would seem to be from like another brand or another person when it's not really. So the tradition at the moment, up until now, has been to name a plugin. So if you're, for example, if you're writing a plugin for Elementor, you'd say things like pop-up ads for Elementor rather than Elementor pop-up ads. So they're basically trying to say that it's not an Elementor focused thing. It's something that you've written for this brand. But it looks like they're trying to reinforce that with WordPress as well. So now they're not accepting the WP dash. So you're going to have to rename your plugins to something else, maybe for WordPress for that. So that's a little bit of a sad news for that, because a lot of people have been using that. And again, it's all kind of bundled into this copyright trademark thing, which they don't really, they don't actually own the WP as a trademark, but it's kind of been branded under that particular function anyway. So you can have a read of that. It's quite interesting the way it's kind of worded, and you know how this exchange went backwards and forwards, and at the end of the day just said, nah, you can't do it, tough. So have a read of that in your own time. Another thing that happened this month, the Classic Editor plugin support has been extended through 2022. So if you don't know what that is, basically if you're using the WordPress app just now, it comes with the Gutenberg or the new block editor by default. If you want to go back to the old WordPress editor, then there's a plugin called Classic Editor. That's what it's called now. So the little kind of Microsoft Word type editor, that's called Classic Plugin. You can install that and enable that, and it'll get rid of the WordPress block editor, and you can have your TinyMCE, the word type editor back again. Now that support was meant to end this year, but because it's being used by quite a few millions of people, they've decided to extend that through to 2022, and I reckon it'll be extended for a lot longer than that. There is a focus group now for WordPress 5.9, which is going to be the next version. There's a link to that there, primarily road to 5.9, and basically they're going to be concentrating, and this is early days yet, they might narrow it down and drop a few things, but they're basically focusing on the full site editing experience, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight. So we're talking about navigation blocks, responsive blocks, user interface for the theme.json, and more integration with block patterns as well. So that's some of the things that's happened, some of the main things that's happened in August for WordPress. And you can read those little articles in your own time. If you want to ask any questions, pop them in the comments. I'll try and pluck them out and see if I can answer them as we go along or at the very, very end. And if you're wondering about links, then all the links are going to be added into the description. I'll put them on the meetup.com page for this one. I'll put them on the live streams as well underneath as comments. You don't need to do all that. You can as well, if you want to save the chat log just before we finish the Zoom. So if you bring up the chat window, there is a little 3 dots or horizontal or vertical. We can click on that and save the chat log, and that should have most of the links for tonight in there anyway. So I'm going to stop sharing at the moment. Just go around, say hi to everyone. If you want to say hi, let me do a little introduction, put your little hand up. So that's in the reactions down below, and you can raise your hand just like that. You know, if you want to do a little bit of an introduction, say hi to everyone, and I'll just give everyone a couple of minutes to do that. Otherwise, I'll just keep on with the presentation. Would anyone like to introduce themselves?
Yes, I can do so. Hi, I am Isabel, and I am a web developer front end. I usually identify more with front end than the back end engineer. And I currently work at Automatic, and I'm working full time on WordPress, which is mostly Gutenberg these days. So I've been doing a lot of stuff with blocks and stuff. I can maybe help answer questions that folks have in terms of like the development and progress of things and how things work. Also always appreciate feedback on stuff that doesn't work so that we can fix it. And yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you, Isabel. Christine, you want to have an introduction? No? No. Okay, anyone else? No, all good. No camera installed, Kristen says. That's all right. We can hear from you. That's all good. And we can have a little bit of chat afterwards as well. Gary wants to introduce himself. Gary, you go ahead, mate.
Okay, thanks, Will. Yeah, so my name's Gary. I'm in Melbourne. I've worked in IT for way too long. I just dabbled in WordPress a little bit over the last few years, but had opportunity over the last few months to develop a website for a local community organisation that I've got a link with. So I did that as a volunteer. So I probably would regard myself still as a beginner, but I've certainly learned a lot over the last few years. So I'm really happy to be using WordPress. I'm quite enjoying it, and I'm quite keen to learn as much as I can. So thanks, Will.
That's great. Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourselves. And see, you'll have an opportunity to chat at the end as well if you want to get to know each other a little bit more. So let me share my screen again. And we'll get on with the talk tonight. I'll just get the chat back up. Yep. Don't you just hate how the Zoom defaults to somebody? The first person who joins, it seems to default to sending a message to that person. It's very annoying. Okay, there we go. Okay, WordPress editing with blocks. Let's jump into this. So let's start with the kind of big picture. Let's zoom all the way out from Gutenberg and talk about the actual project as well. So if you don't know what Gutenberg is, it was the name kind of given to the plugin, the experimental plugin, when Automatic were trying to develop this kind of block editor thing. And it was actually more than just the editor itself. It's a bigger project. It encompasses the whole kind of roadmap, idea, concepts, and projects to modernize WordPress and bring kind of a better creation experience to the app overall. Now, when the new Gutenberg editor was released, and that was in WordPress 5.0, and that launched in December 2018, it basically replaced the long-used, what we call TinyMCE. That was the plugin that was used for the editor itself. It was basically caused quite a stir in the community at this time. It was a completely different editing experience. And you can have a look. There's a link to the plugin, the Gutenberg plugin as well. It's still evolving. It's still a project in its own, right? So at that time, the block-based editor, and it was kind of known as Gutenberg editor, at that time, it was a very, very basic number of blocks that could only really be stacked on top of each other. So you're talking about things like paragraph, header, image, kind of very, very basic stuff. And that particular project has evolved and changed over the past 2 years and now encompasses things like layout blocks. So it's moved away from just like the normal vertical stack block and moved into a more kind of layout thing. So a lot of people are asking at the very beginning, how is this going to compete with the page builders out there? So we're talking about Divi, Oxygen, Elementor, and Beaver Builder. And for those first couple of years, it really couldn't. But then they started bringing out these layout blocks. You could choose columns, and then you could group things together. And suddenly it started to evolve a little bit more into something you could really kind of build a basic website with, rather than just kind of stacking blocks on the top for those. So it's now just called the WordPress editor or block editor. And the Gutenberg project, and Isabel might correct me if I'm wrong, but the Gutenberg project has kind of somewhat evolved into more of kind of a full site editing project as well, which aims at allowing WordPress users to edit everything as easily as they can using the block-based editor. And we're talking about things like headers and footers, sidebars, widgets, theme templates, and navigation elements. Basically everything you would need to build a fully functioning website, just like you would if you're using something like Elementor or Beaver. That's kind of the end goal for that. So in WordPress 5.8, block editing was extended to widgets, and for the first incarnation of the new template editor was made publicly available, although disabled for non-block-based themes, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later tonight. So let's have a look at how we can now edit content using the WordPress core features. So we're not talking about any plugins other than the Gutenberg plugin if you want to install that, but we're talking about all the stuff that's in the core tonight. So as a quick refresher, here's what the old WordPress TinyMCE editor looked like. On the left, so this editor is now called the classic editor. And on the right, we have the Gutenberg or block editor, which is what it looks like right now. So it's more than an aesthetic update, though Gutenberg completely changes the editing experience by moving to a block-based approach to content. So while the current focus is on content creation, the eventual goal, as I said, is to have this full site editing experience, and it's usually abbreviated to FSE. So if you see FSE dropped around WordPress forums and things, that's what it's talking about. It's talking about the full site editing experience. So how does the block editor work? So essentially, Gutenberg replaces the single edit field of the current WordPress TinyMCE editor with lots of individual blocks. And these blocks then allow you to build more complex designs than those allowed in the old classic WordPress editor. Because remember, the old editor was kind of just basic like Microsoft Word. So it was one big field, and you can add stuff into it, and it's all kind of grouped together in that one field. And this block editor breaks that model and brings in this concept of blocks, which are single entities that can be moved around, and they have their own settings and stuff like that. So blocks, they basically stack on top of each other, and you can reorder them easily up and down. You can see some of the graphics there. But it has moved into more of a layout. There are some layout blocks. We'll have a look at some of those in a little bit as well. Okay, so what is a block? So a block can pretty much be anything. So for example, you can have blocks for headings, paragraphs, images, galleries, video embeds, buttons, widgets, tables, buttons, columns, and lots more. So basically anything you can think of that you might want to put on a WordPress page or integrate a plugin with, that could be a block content. And people are free. There's a framework now. So plugin developers or developers can build their own blocks as well. So you're not just limited to the ones that are in the WordPress core. And you'll probably see if you have installed something like WooCommerce, that you now have a whole list of WooCommerce blocks that you can drag onto your posts and pages. Now, those are just a few examples of some of the blocks available in the WordPress core. And many more, of course, can be added by all the different plugins like WooCommerce and everything else. So each block has its own entity that you can manipulate on an individual basis. So here's a sample page with 3 blocks. It's got a quote, an image, and a paragraph block. And I'm using the move up and move down position arrows to move the block where I want it to go. And each block comes with its own specific block settings available from the right-hand side settings sidebar. So you can see that little thin column there. And once you click on a block, that's the majority of the block settings that you can customize the block with. So here are most of the text blocks. So when you add a block into WordPress, you click on the add button, it's going to scroll down another column, and you'll see that most of the blocks are columned together or blocked together, grouped together in different titles. And these are what's called text blocks, these ones here. So we've got the paragraph, heading, list, quote, some code if you want to drop some code. You can actually have a classic editor, so you can still bring in the TinyMCE, the old classic editor, if you want to use that exclusively. So you can bring that in as a block. Pre-formatted, pull quote, and table and verse. So if you're into poetry, you can have a verse block in there. So those are the text blocks available. We've got some media blocks as well. So these are concentrated around by images and video, but can also use files and audio as well. So they're grouped together as media. So if you want to bring in some video, want to bring in some galleries, this is the types of blocks that are available in the core app for those at the moment. Then this is where Gutenberg has kind of evolved a little bit more. So in the beginning, Gutenberg just has those basic blocks that you could stack on each other. But now we've got something called design blocks, and that's starting to go into the area of layout. So now we have columns, we have groups as well. So we can now have columns of blocks and drop blocks into columns. So it's getting more into layout and building the full site editing stuff as well. So things like site logo and site title and site tagline. So those are things in the WordPress setting, being able to grab those out and put them onto a page, whereas before you could really only do that if you're hiring a template designer or a developer. So these types of more WordPress settings have been encapsulated into blocks that you can then drop into posts and pages. Then we've got widget blocks as well. So things like shortcodes, archives, calendar, categories, RSS feeds, all these kind of things where if you went into the appearance widgets before and were trying to drop stuff into a sidebar, most of those are now coming out as blocks now, available not just in the sidebar, but to any post and page within the block editor. Then we've got theme blocks as well. So these are the kind of newer additions to WordPress, released in WordPress 5.8 or maybe the release before. And these blocks are geared more towards this kind of full site editing theme template editor. So we've got things like the query loop. And what that does is if you drag that onto a post or page, it actually allows you to display a list of posts or pages based on like something like a category or a keyword or a tag. So again, something that you'd really have to go back to a WordPress developer or designer to build a template for. These are the types of blocks that are coming in to allow you as an end user to build kind of your own themes and your own templates with those. So query loop, post title, featured image, post lists, logging in and out. So things like that for there. Then we've got embed blocks. Now this is about a quarter of the embed blocks. I didn't have enough pages for that. There's thousands of embed blocks, but these are the main ones. So we're talking about things like Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, Vimeo, WordPress itself. You know, if you want to drag a quote from another WordPress website, and other different external social media places. Basically, these are the ones that are recognized. And again, they'll have specific functions depending on which block you're using. So for example, Twitter might have some different settings than Vimeo or WordPress as well. So those are your embed blocks if you want to bring something from an external website. And lastly, just as some examples, if you have WooCommerce installed, these are some of the WooCommerce blocks that get added to that list once you go into the editor and if you've got WooCommerce installed. So things like reviews, prices, newest products we've got there, products by tag, top rated products as well. So really useful things that you might want to use if you're building something like a sales page or a landing page based on the WordPress block editor. You now have access to all this stuff that really, if you were thinking about building a WordPress site before, you'd probably be looking at a theme and then looking at what templates are given in the theme to allow you to display this sort of stuff. Now that's being brought into the WordPress editor and being available to everyone as blocks. So hopefully everyone understands that. That's kind of a very basic concept of what blocks are. Okay, so let's have a closer look at the block settings. So the block editor has undergone a lot of changes over the last few years. However, I find that the UI, the user interface and user experience is still overly complicated. I still think there needs to be a lot of work done on that. Now, there are three main areas where various block settings reside. So the right-hand side settings column, so that's the long strip at the right-hand side, under the block link contains most of the settings for blocks. So this is where you probably do your most customization for a block. So things like the style, things like colors, backgrounds, anchor linked text, anything that be related to how you customize that particular block. So for example, the query loop block, from these settings, that's where you'll be able to change the post type for post or page or product, and then the categories or tags or things like that. So most of the settings for the blocks are in this right-hand side column. However, we do have right above the block itself, we have the top bar above the block, and that contains icons to move and drag and change the type, as well as some formatting such as positioning. But it can also contain custom actions as well. So here we've got a photo, highlighted photo of Yoda. We can see that there's, if you kind of follow it along, you probably won't be able to know what those are, but there's a link icon, and then there's a crop icon, and then there's a text over image icon, and then there's a dual tone icon. The dual tone is the round one there. So as well as having the right-hand side column with all of the settings, we've also got a top bar that allows for positioning, but we've also got some settings on that top bar as well for that. And thirdly, there are three vertical dots at the very end of this top bar, and it has its own flyout menu, allowing actions like remove block, copy block, duplicate block, and things like that. So there's really three separate interfaces for how you interact with blocks, how you move blocks, how how you change block settings. So I still think it's a little bit complicated, and I think there needs to be a lot of work done there, and there probably will be, because these things do tend to change quite a bit over different WordPress releases. Okay. So button groupings. Button groupings. Yep. So this is groups. So it should say block groupings. So you can now group blocks together. So as well as just have them stack up on each other, you might want to group 4 or 5 different blocks together, so you can move them up and down and position them where you want them to go. And you can do this now. So here I've grouped together a column block that has a paragraph in the left-hand side and a button in the right-hand side with another button block above it. Don't ask me why, it's just those are the blocks I created. Now, this is where the interface can get a little bit confusing. Now, you can select each of the blocks separately within the group, and you select them, and then the options come up with the block in the right-hand side column. So you can change things like the button background, the link color. And similarly for the columns as well, you can click into it, you can get access to the paragraph, so you can change all the text and all the options, and the blue button next to it and change all those options. But to select the group, you've got to first use that icon. You can see this is an example here. So I've clicked into some of the blocks, and then I've clicked that icon in the top bar at the very top left, and that changes it from individual blocks to the group block. And sometimes for within this, you kind of click on it 2 or 3 times. So you click on it to be a block, you click on it and you maybe get the column settings, and you click on it again and you get the overall group settings for that. So it can be a bit fiddly, and sometimes it doesn't always work. And in fact, selecting blocks inside groups can be a bit tricky as well, because even knowing that there's a block there can sometimes be really difficult to visually tell. So we've as developers, we've given feedback to Automatic as well, and they're kind of moving more towards a kind of WYSIWYG editing style. So they want your page, when you're in the block editor, they're wanting the page to look as close as they can to your final goal. So basically, what you see is what you get. And maybe that's sacrificing a little bit on the usability there for that. But, these things are evolving quite quickly, as they get feedback. So things could change, in the future. So if you are finding that a little bit difficult, selecting groups and columns and blocks in a sort of hierarchy, the current solution is to use something called the list view. So there's a list view icon at the top. So on the left-hand side here, we can see there's the WordPress editing icon, and that takes you back from editing a post into the WordPress dashboard again. You got the plus for the block, but right along at the right-hand side, that's the black block with the arrow pointing to it. That's called the list view. And what that does is it flies out another column, and it can show you all your blocks and the order that they're in. So that's the same page that you were seeing before. And you can see at the top, there's a quote, there's a verse, there's an image, there's a paragraph, and then you have your group. And within the group, you have a button, and then you've got your columns, and within the columns, you've got a column and then a button paragraph. So it shows you the hierarchy. And you might be a little bit familiar with this because the page builders like Beaver and Elementor and Divi, they've got this kind of list view as well, because no matter what builder you're using, if it's Gutenberg or Elementor, you're going to end up with stuff inside stuff inside stuff. So that's probably your best way to try and figure out which button you want to target, is to use this list view at the side. So that's really, really helpful. So if you are building kind of more complicated Gutenberg pages or posts, then this list view icon and this column is probably going to be your friend. I've certainly got it on quite a lot when I'm designing my landing pages in the Gutenberg editor. It's really, really handy. Okay, so we've had single blocks, we've had block grouping, so group blocks now. So we can have something called a reusable block. Now, when you have a group of blocks or even like a single block, once you've configured its settings, so you've set its background, you've set all its properties, you can actually save that as something called a reusable block. Now, in fact, clicking on the 3 vertical icons, the 3 vertical dots in the top toolbar, and you get all these settings like duplicate and copy, but you've also got one called add to reusable blocks, which is really, really cool. And WordPress will prompt you for a name to give to that reusable block. I'm just going to check my next one. Is that? No. Okay. So yeah, so you save it as a reusable block, give it a name, and then when you want to reuse that block again, you don't have to then drag it down and change all the settings. When you go into blocks, you'll see at the very bottom of your column where all the blocks are, you'll see something called reusable. And that's where all your reused or saved blocks are going to be kept. And this can be really, really useful if you're developing things like sales pages or landing pages. When you've got your brand, your WordPress brand, so your company brand, you've usually want to kind of keep the same rough look and feel and brand for your different pages. So this can be really useful. You could save like a grouping of an image, a text, a button, and a form as part of your kind of sales page, your landing page, your sign up, your opt-in stuff. And then you could just reuse that and then maybe just tweak a few things in with that. And it just saves you having to create all that sort of stuff again from scratch. So I'm a big fan of these reusable blocks. I think they're really, really useful. Okay, so we've had single blocks, we've had group blocks, we've had reusable blocks. This kind of new thing is called block patterns. And it was introduced a few versions back WordPress. So Gutenberg block patterns, or simply called block patterns, they're kind of predefined layouts made up of regular Gutenberg blocks. Now, the block patterns, they can act just like regular blocks, meaning you can edit them after you insert them. So you can get all the individual block components of the pattern. However, the predefined layouts kind of make it really easy to create an attractive page. So with block patterns, you can choose from various layouts to customize each section for those. So remember, these are kind of predefined groupings or blocks, groupings of blocks together. Now, block patterns, they can be as simple as like a group of buttons, or they can have a specific purpose, like a contact information section with a form embedded in that. So in addition to the default block patterns option, you can also create custom patterns as well. And that means that theme and plugin developers, well, they can add their own block patterns themselves, which gives them even more options to customize things. So you might see block patterns emerge for specific plugins like WooCommerce or some membership plugins that are kind of more specific to that kind of type of WordPress type of website. Now you can find some pre-built patterns. I'll just copy this down here. So actually, if you go to wordpress.org/patterns, I'll type that in here, wordpress.org/patterns. You can go there and you can see some of the current WordPress patterns, block patterns. And there's also the previous link there. There's also some template and patterns there for those. Now, WordPress or block patterns, they can really deserve a whole WordPress topic just in themselves because they're kind of quite complicated and there's quite a lot of them to look through. And again, it can be as simple as a few blocks grouped together or as complex as almost like an entire landing page as well. So you could give like an entire talk just on block patterns. Okay, so full site editing, block-based widget editor. So the regular widget area as of WordPress 5.8 has kind of been replaced by a block-based editor, which means that if you are in any widget area or any sidebar area, you now got access to the complete range of blocks. You can put them in there the same as you would for any page or post available to you. Now, this widget block editor, it's also available in the customizer as well. So if you're customizing and previewing your website, if you go to the customize and widgets, then you've got that block-based editor within that. But a warning from me, in my opinion, I think that interface needs a lot of tweaking for that because it's a really kind of, for me, it's really poor user interface and user experience because you're kind of confined already to a really small sidebar. And then you've got, the editor, block editor in that, with its top navigation and it's all flyout menus. So you kind of get exposed to all these flyout menus when you start editing with the block-based widget editor in the customizer. That is. So I kind of stick to the appearance and widget editor for there to try and do all my widgets within that, because at least it gives you a larger screen space for that. But, this is a new thing. As they get feedback, the team gets feedback within this, I'm sure the UI and the user experience is going to change. It's going to evolve rather quickly as they start to get feedback from that. But definitely, you know, everything's kind of moving towards this block-based editor to be in everything, everywhere you go. So it's a really good idea if you're still using the classic plugin. It's a good idea to start at least installing a WordPress installation somewhere, so you can play around with this block-based editor, because it's going to be, you know, it's going to be here to stay for a long time. Okay, here is another feature of the block-based editing. So as of WordPress 5.8, and that's the latest drop a few weeks ago, excuse me, they've introduced a very, very basic block-based template editor. And this is part of this full site editing project that I've talked about before. And it's aimed at replacing the traditionally, maybe not replacing, making it easier for people to build their own theme templates, where traditionally you would have a developer or designer code up in PHP a template page for you. This whole concept is being able to edit or add that template yourself using all these kind of new blocks that are being introduced. So if you have a block enabled theme, then the templates are going to be available for you to test right now. Otherwise, if you've not got a specific block-based theme, you need to drop a little bit of code in there for that. Now, please note that full site editing at the moment doesn't yet support your theme header or footer. So any templates that you create in this new template editor are not going to have a header or a footer. There's going to kind of be a blank canvas. But you can experiment with them by creating things like landing pages or sales pages that traditionally don't really have a header or footer. But I would recommend you probably don't implement this on any production sites just yet, because I reckon, because it's really new and it's just been introduced into WordPress 5.8, even though it's in core, I think this particular part is going to evolve really quickly and change quite a bit. So I spoke about the new template editor in my last WP Quickie, and you can watch that. I'll drop the link here. There's a little link there. It's only about 30 minutes long. And I kind of delve into the new template editor and how to enable it, how to drop some code if your theme isn't enabled for that, and just, you know, kind of walk through about what it is and how it works. So please note that the template editor is very rough around the edges at the moment. So if I had to put a classification on it, I would call it an alpha release, which is a very early release, and is likely to change over subsequent WordPress releases. Okay, so full site editing, what is next? So as I say, all this sort of stuff, all these changes from WordPress since WordPress 5, is kind of all building up to this experience called full site editing. Now it's getting there slowly for that, but it's definitely chugging along with each new WordPress release. So, excuse me, you can expect a lot of changes to template editor, as well as the introduction to WordPress of new blocks for things like navigation elements, like breadcrumbs, and other kind of site structures like headers and footers. At some point, I assume there will be a header and footer block editor in some shape or form to allow you to do that, similar to Elementor or Beaver or Divi or Astra, any of these kind of complicated themes that allow you to set headers and footers. I assume that at some point, maybe in 5.9, that these things are going to start to be rolled out in a kind of more kind of public showcase fashion. But as I mentioned at the start, there's no kind of real scope or roadmap kind of written down for the project. It's very much, at the moment, it's very much just kind of experimental within the plugins themselves. And then once it gets a little bit of stability, then they kind of move it more into core as it kind of shapes and rounds that at the moment. Now, if this is all too much for you to handle, and I know for some people and for some of my clients, it's just too much for them to learn new stuff, and they're quite happy with, you know, just chugging along with the old WordPress style, you can add something called the classic plugin editor, or the classic editor. So I'll drop a link down there. So we talked about the support for that at the very beginning of the news. It's been extended, so it's officially maintained by Automatic, and its support has been extended to 2022. But if you install this editor into a new WordPress version, it basically gets rid of the block editor. So it allows you to have that classic editing experience, that one big field with all those buttons that look like Microsoft Word. So if all the things about blocks is getting you worried, or if you have client websites that you really don't want those people to start using the blocks yet until you've got your head switched on about it, until you've got processes and training in place, then you can always switch back to the classic editor, and it's fully supported at least until next year as well. Okay, so that's all I have to chat about tonight. I've chatted quite a lot about the block editor, what blocks are, how it kind of fits in with the bigger goal of the Gutenberg project and the full site editing suite as well. Now, remember, the goals of Gutenberg and full site editing project is to make content creation easier and more accessible to everyone. So I'm really keen to hear what your thoughts are regarding the blocks, the new editor, the full site project as a whole. And if you have any questions as well about these things, then I'm happy to take those now, because that's kind of the end of the presentation. So I'll get rid of this screen share just now. Stop share. And then jump back into it. So guys, have you got any comments, any questions about blocks, block editing, full site editing, anything at all? Throw it out there and we'll have a little discussion about that. I'll have a look through the chat as well.
Will and everybody else, I only really came to WordPress with any sort of real focus using the block editor. So that's pretty much all I've known. And yeah, I find it really good to use. I got some extra blocks from Genesis Blocks and added those in, and yeah, and I've created a couple of my own. Pretty simple little blocks that I created to just simplify some stuff that I was doing. And yeah, I find it a really easy environment to work in.
That's great. Thanks for your feedback, Gary. I think a lot of new people to WordPress, they don't have that historical knowledge of the classic editor. So they just kind of just go into, you know, this is what it is. Like, this is how I'm going to build my website. So that's great. Great to know. Christine is asking that she ended up reverting to using columns rather than using a gallery layout for images because of the problems with responsive designs. Is there any better control of responsive design? Isabel, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Do you know of anything like that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I'd love to know more about what the problem with the gallery layout was, because it is responsive. It's I mean, it's responsive perhaps in a bit of a different way from the columns block. So you might not be able to do, say, a single column layout for a mobile phone or something. So I'd love to know more in detail about what Christine was trying to do. But yeah, the responsive stuff is something that we keep working on. There's recently, we're making changes to the gallery block to enable it to use image blocks inside it. And that will allow us to customize each image in the gallery individually. In terms of the responsive behavior, it will probably stay the same. But if there's anything actually wrong, so here is where I say, like, give us feedback. If you find that something looks broken, something doesn't work the way you expect it to, then let us know. Create an issue in the GitHub repository. That's probably the easiest way to sort of put something on our radar. Just go in, make an issue, go, hey, look, this doesn't seem to work the way I thought it would. Here's, you know, what I expected. And yeah, if it's a bug, we'll fix it, or we'll at the very least explain why this works in this way and sort of give you a workaround to be able to do what you want to do.
That's great. Thanks, Isabel. And if you don't know what the GitHub thing is or how to leave issues, then you can just go into wordpress.org and find the Gutenberg plugin, and there's a support link, and just kind of leave a comment on there, and that'll get back to the team as well. You know.
Yeah, also that, but I'll add a link here in the chat to the issues in the Gutenberg repo.
Awesome. So there we go. So if you've got any issues with Gutenberg, you can click on that link and provide the problem, and that'll go directly back to the team. Is that right, Isabel?
Yeah. I'm just seeing that Christine replied here. The problem is with the flex layout, can't be changed. So a 3-column gallery will end up with very small images on mobile. That is something that we should probably work on. Yeah, that's something that needs to be fixed. If you have 3 images side by side, I think the assumption is, I think the gallery should work more or less like the columns. It should at least have an option to make it stack on mobile. And that's Yeah, I think that would be worth bringing up. Maybe I'll have a hunt around for an issue, and if there isn't one, I'll create one. I think that's something that would be worth fixing. Yeah, thanks for the feedback, Christy.
Am I right, Isabel, in thinking that the 5.9 roadmap, that responsiveness has been part of that for the consideration for the roadmap? I remember reading something about seeing a more responsive design similar to what you talked about, maybe like mobile or kind of breakpoints like that.
Yeah. So mostly what's in the 5.9 roadmap, the responsiveness thing there is very much about enabling website builders to actually control the responsiveness of their blocks, which currently you can't really. Well, you can do it to a very limited extent. There's a couple of blocks that have toggles where you can go stack on mobile, but there's not a real lot of control that you can have over, say, if you want to add a bit of extra padding to a block and you want it to be bigger on desktop than on mobile, that sort of thing. And we really want to add more fine-grained controls around how, so people can actually go in and, I want this block to look this way on mobile, I want it to look that way on desktop, which we currently can't do. So a lot of the work is in that direction.
That's cool. So it's coming. It's coming. It's on the horizon.
Definitely coming, yes.
Yeah, I think that the speed of the Gutenberg project has probably been quite slow to start with, but it's certainly picking up a lot of momentum as it's going forward. The changes that's happened in the last 2.5 years have been like super significant compared with maybe when WordPress 5 was initially released or when it was more experimental. I think we're starting to see an evolution quite a lot of the WordPress, this full site editing experience as well. Christine also asked, will custom CSS classes be neater? How do you mean by neater? You can add custom CSS classes to blocks, all blocks. Yeah.
It's an option in the sidebar, but neater. How so, I wonder? Yeah,
just drop down in the comments, Christine, what you mean by neater for those CSS. In the meantime, anyone else got any comments about WordPress blocks, the block editor, full site editing, anything at all? And just drop that in the comments, or you can speak out. I think Christine says she finds it a little messy at the moment with how the classes are added, how they're added. Okay.
How they're added to the block. So when you add a custom CSS class to a block, that class will be added to the block, so that the sort of top level element in the block wrapper, as it were.
Yeah, maybe it's the name. Is it the name or the location, or
is there anything unexpected about how it works? That's like, I'd really like to know more specifics around this.
Anyone else want to share their experiences with the WordPress block editor, or maybe comments on the full site editing, what their expectations are for those? Nope, we're all silent tonight. We're all drinking our wines.
Assuming we've had dinner yet.
Assuming we've had dinner, yeah. I've not had any dinner yet.
Sorry, Will, the phone won't stop ringing.
Yeah, that's all right. That's okay. I put mine on mute. It doesn't stop it from ringing, but I don't.
I've been here and listening to you and Isabel. So thanks for the and Gary, of course, too. So thanks for all the feedback and information.
How are you finding editing with blocks, Darry? Is it just like a natural process now, or?
To be honest with you, I haven't really used it a great deal. Yeah, I do a lot of work with Elementor, but yeah, the native Gutenberg editor, I haven't really used a great deal, to tell you the truth. I have recommended it to a lot of people, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
I think about a year ago, then I probably wouldn't have entertained building anything with the Gutenberg editor, any kind of serious page. But now that it's got like columns, and now that it's got things like the query loop coming out, so now it's got more of those kind of more fundamental theme related blocks, you know, and actually the side effect of this new template editor not having the header and footer is best for landing pages. I know that's not the main expectation was, but you know, if you want to start somewhere, then building landing pages is probably the best thing you can do with Gutenberg at the moment.
Yeah, I had a bit of a play the other day after your talk on the query loop. So I had a bit of a look at it, but I can't say I've used it enough to have a good a real good understanding of it as yet. But I have to try. It does look very impressive though, especially with, you know, what you demonstrated today. Yeah,
I mean, I think there's always going to be a place for page builders like Elementor and Beaver Builder. And I know that the CEO of Elementor, he had like a fireside chat just a few weeks ago. And one of the questions I asked him was, you know, what are your thoughts about the Gutenberg editor? And he thinks it's wonderful. He thinks it's great because it means competition, and competition in the market spurs innovation for that. So, you know, not to say everyone's trying to outdo each other, well, they are, but, you know, everyone's trying to bring new features and try and grab a slice of the pie. And that's just only going to make everything a lot better. So here we see things like Beaver and Divi and Elementor. They're rushing out to get this new Google Core Web Vitals to reduce their footprint, to make, you know, the experience with using them a lot faster and better. But at the same time, WordPress is coming out from the other side. They're like as lean and as fast as you can get, and they're building up towards the full site editing experience without, you know, with the speed in mind. So they don't have this great big heavy thing that they're just dropping in. They're building up from like the kind of the lean all the way up to that side, which I think is a great way of developing that. Steph's joined us. He says he does prefer Elementor for now. Yeah, it's got more flexibility, that's for sure. There's a lot more themes based on Elementor, and design options are way more advanced, but Gutenberg seems to be fast. Yeah, exactly. Just exactly what I was saying. You can't get any faster than building just WordPress core. Anything you add on to WordPress core, you're going to get slower. Isabel,
that's the main motivation for. So, I mean, it's the best thing, I guess, about having the site editing functionality in core is that you'll get it, and we're working actively on making the performance good so that can be a great experience. I guess that'll always be the major selling point of not using any plugins on top.
Yeah, totally. Christine likes the HTML blocks. She likes those. I like HTML blocks too. Yeah.
You can do anything with them. They're great.
You can even install a PHP plugin, and you've got a PHP code block that you can put into your node. Don't do that. I'm sure that's been banned from the repository. Okay, guys, if we haven't got anything else to chat about, then I'm going to call tonight a close. I'll see if we've got any other notices for those. No, not really. I've only got a thing to say. Join WPAustralia.org. In fact, I'll just share my screen out just now. A couple of extra graphics, and then we'll end tonight, let people go and have their dinner. So if you're kind of new to these WordPress meetups, visit WPAustralia.org. And you can find out more about all the WordPress meetups over Australia. There's a button in there, find meetup, and there's also a button to say join us on Slack, and that to give you instructions on how to join our Slack group. And if you haven't joined Slack or you don't know what it is, it's basically like just an online community. It's got different little channels for different subjects like plugins and Gutenberg and jobs and support and security and that sort of stuff. And most of us WordPress professionals, we kind of hang out on Slack during the day, or at least we've got like one window open on one of our monitors. And it's really a great way, especially during COVID, to kind of get to know the community. If you're new here, just like drop into the general, say hi. If you've got any questions, you can drop them in there. If you're an expert, you can answer questions in there as well. But it's good just to get to know some people all over Australia, so that when we do get back to physical meetups, at least, you know, you'll recognize people. Say, oh, yeah, I've been chatting to you for 6 months. It's good to see you in person. So definitely if you can, drop into wpaustralia.org, have a look at all the meetups, and then join us on Slack as well. And that'd be really good if you can do that and just continue the conversation here. There's a Gutenberg channel, and the automaticians kind of monitor all that stuff as well. And yeah, thanks very much, guys. Thank you for all the questions. Thanks for your input. And yeah, it's just nice to get to know some new people. Hopefully join us next month. I don't have a topic for next month, but if you keep an eye on the meetup.com page, then I'll announce something. I'll put together something next week or so and get a topic up there. And I think we'll just continue in Zoom because it's been quite nice to see people's cheery faces for that, and people's purple hair. Cameron, that's been good. And yeah, so thanks very much, guys. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you guys next month. Okay, ciao.
Thanks, Will. Great
Thanks,
pleasure.
Will.
Thank you.